So in my hands right now I have the brand new RTX 5070, and I'll just come right out and say it. This thing is basically just an RTX 4070 Super minus 50 bucks. There you go. Saved you 10 minutes of graphs and waffling over a product that pretty much already exists. And I certainly would not be rushing out to buy one on day one, and you probably won't be able to get one anyway. But today, rather than wasting your time going over a GPU that really isn't that exciting, I want to talk about a GPU that gamers really actually want. Let's talk about that. Before that, this video is brought to you by Jawa. Jawa's mission is to be the community for safely buying and selling PC parts at a reasonable price, offering low fees and great customer service, which I can definitely attest to, as I personally bought this RTX 3070 from Jawa anonymously, and not only did it arrive quickly, but when I ran into an issue, they immediately replaced it with a flawless substitute and asked that I only send the old one back after I confirmed the new GPU worked great. And the best part is the price I got this card at was well below other listings I could find anywhere else, likely thanks in part to Jawa's much lower seller fees of 9 to 12% depending on when you join. In fact, this is probably the best platform for selling PC parts on the internet, and I plan on making it my personal go-to. So if you're interested in buying or selling PC parts on a platform with low fees and great customer service, be sure to click the link in the description below and watch out for some of my hardware that'll likely be popping up very soon. So yes, the RTX 5070. To be fair, it does have a couple of upgrades over the RTX 4070 Super, such as DisplayPort 2.1, as well as you are going to get multi-frame generation. But to be honest with you, I'm just not really that interested in multi-frame generation. And with DisplayPort 2.1, I feel like that actually is the only real legitimately great upgrade about the RTX 5070. Other than that, if you've got a 4070 Super, well, definitely hang on to that and do not buy the RTX 5070. And if you had a chance to buy a 4070 Super anytime in the last year, I saw them as low as 480 bucks. You're basically saving at best 50 bucks on this thing, maybe $30. So this is really an underwhelming launch from Nvidia, and I'm very disappointed with the final performance of this thing. I mean, take a look here in games like Black Myth Wukong. It basically has identical performance to the 4070 Super. In Call of Duty Black Ops 6, 4K DLSS balanced. It actually has less performance in my testing, which is crazy. And then in a game like Counter-Strike 2, it got around a 10% increase. And overall, you know what that gets you? It gets you 1 frame more on average across 10 different games, which I'll have all those benchmarks in the description below if you want to actually look at them. But yeah, it's not interesting. 1 frame per second more on the 5070 versus the 4070 Super, and saving 50 bucks is really not great. Oh, me from the future, forgot to mention, Nvidia did send me the 5070 Founders Edition for a review, so thank you, Nvidia. And obviously that did not change my opinions on the product. Back to the video. That is very, very disappointing, and I hope that it ends up aging a bit better than this because of the higher memory bandwidth. But with only 12 gigabytes of VRAM still, as it is still housing the same amount of VRAM that the RTX 4070 Super had, which was fine back then, but is kind of cutting it now. Well, I actually don't think this thing is going to age particularly well, unless you're willing to reduce settings, which, let's face it, you're definitely going to have to be doing even in combination with DLSS, or you might run into some results like this. Now, I can't confirm 100% that this is a VRAM problem, but I did see a very bizarre result where Cyberpunk 2077 over and over and over again at the max settings was giving me just 8 frames per second at 4K on this card. And I wouldn't be surprised if more games have this problem in the future. So I think it's safe to say that I don't think there's going to be a lot of excitement around the RTX 5070 from pretty much any tech reviewers or any buyers in general. I mean, to be fair, hey, it looks great and I love that it's got the new DisplayPort, but honestly, last generation probably should have already had DisplayPort 2.1, and then they could have just cut the price 50 bucks, and here we are. However, the GPU that I was kind of expecting to see, and I think that gamers are really hoping for, is something that I think actually will be coming in the future, and I'm going to call it the RTX 5070 Super. Now, the 5070 is based off of the GB205 GPU die, and this has 48 out of 50 streaming multiprocessors, which you can think of as the cores enabled. So there's not a whole lot of room to improve the core performance. They certainly could, and I think should, increase the clock speeds, and they could enable those last 2 cores, but it's not going to give them a whole lot more performance. You'll probably be looking at 5 to 10% more performance immediately, at least on paper, if they were to to enable the full GPU and clock it higher. However, this GPU, let's be honest, it should have come this way already, and I think this card will be coming, but I could be wrong. We'll see. It should have come with, I think, 18 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, why do I say that? Well, the RTX 5070 still has a 192-bit bus, which means that, well, you can only put 6 chips on here. That's just the way the math works out, and 6 times 2, because they typically come in 2 gigabyte modules, gets you 12 gigabytes of VRAM. But as we know, 12 gigabytes of VRAM is not going to age real well, and I feel like if you're spending over $500, that's just a tough ask for such an expensive graphics card in today's market. But there actually are, I don't know if you've seen this, but I'll throw something up on screen now, 3 gigabyte modules now of GDDR7, and in fact, they can probably clock much, much higher as well. But even at the same clock speeds, that could allow Nvidia to get the same memory bandwidth, but actually up the amount of VRAM on this card at very little cost increase to, instead of 12 gigabytes, 18 gigabytes of VRAM, as 6 times 3 is, yes, 18, if you didn't drop out of preschool like this guy. But in any case, that would actually be a very substantial increase in VRAM, and I think would have made this card a whole lot better. But I also feel like the price point is still too high. I mean, sure, maybe they could get away with 550 at 18 gigabytes of VRAM with a 5070 Super, which again, I think will be coming out, and I'll be sure to update you guys on anything that I hear about a Super series. I think they're coming, but we'll see. It's a little early to be getting too far into it. But honestly, even 550, I feel like would still be too high. I think it would have to come in at $499. And you know what, to be honest with you, if that was the specs of this card right now, if this was $499 and had 18 gigabytes of VRAM and gave you 5 or 10% more performance and similar memory bandwidth, I think this would be a really, really good card, because you wouldn't have to be worrying about running out of memory. You'd be able to do path tracing, all the ray tracing effects that take more memory. You'd be able to max out your games and your textures. It would continue to look good down the road, but that's just not the case with this card, and you'd be getting a substantial price to performance upgrade, because right now, if you take a look at the RTX 5070, well, unfortunately, yes, while it is technically the best price to performance card, it's just not moving the needle that much when compared to the 4070 Super, even when that was full retail. But at $499 with a little extra performance and the extra VRAM, not only would it age better, but you'd be looking at a massive improvement to the price to performance, probably closer to around 25% in terms of an improvement. And I think that really would get buyers excited, but that's just not what we have here. And that's why I feel like the RTX 5070 just isn't cutting it for me as a graphics card, and isn't something that I would recommend rushing out to buy. Now, to be fair, maybe it'll be the only thing you can buy, and in that case, sure, go ahead, knock yourself out. It's certainly not a bad graphics card. It looks great, it runs pretty good, but I will say probably avoid the Founders Edition model, because take a look at this. Actually, the noise and temperature of this card is pretty bad. It's kind of closer to the RTX 5090 Founders Edition, which, mind you, draws over twice the amount of power, 572 watts versus 252 watts on the 5070. That's a big difference, and yet the 5070 Founders Edition is barely any quieter than the 5090 at 51 versus 56 decibels, and is actually almost as hot as well. 76 degrees is what I measured versus 83 on the 5090, and it's much more noisy and much hotter than the 5070 Ti or 5080. So I'm a bit disappointed with the 5070 Founders Edition in terms of its design as well. I mean, it might look good, but I mean, like, maybe I'm going crazy here, but like, you can see through these fans right here, and right here, it doesn't like feel, this feels like plastic. So is this plastic right here? Like, are we putting plastic fake vent fans on? Like, that would be crazy. I hope that's not the case, because that's crazy, and that would probably explain why the temperature and the noise of this card is not so great. Yeah, so regardless of whether it is or isn't plastic on the back, the temperature and the noise is not good either. So the 5070, boy, I wish this was a 5070 Super, and I hope that's coming sooner rather than later with 18 gigabytes of VRAM at $499 and not 12 at $550. And heck, to be honest with you, they could have even gotten away with a 160-bit bus instead of 192, clocked the GDDR7 higher, giving you basically the same amount of memory bandwidth, but giving you 15 gigabytes of VRAM instead of 12, and that also would have been better. And That's what gamers want. Nvidia gamers do not want a $550 card with 12 gigabytes of VRAM in 2025. They just don't. Gamers want more than 12 gigabytes of VRAM, preferably close to 16 gigabytes or higher if possible, and they want it for $499. Because to be honest with you, if you're spending as much as an entire console in just one component, the gamers that are buying this are going to want to be able to have superior image quality long into the future than said console, not the same or possibly less in the future because you're running out of video memory. And that's something that I worry about with the RTX 5070, and I think you're going to see it. So for this one, I think it's a miss for me. I'm disappointed with pretty much everything about it except for the new DisplayPort connection, and this is, to be honest with you, yeah, the entire 50 series as a whole wasn't massively exciting in terms of the price to performance improvements, but I did feel like the 5090, 5080, and 5070 Ti, while they might not blow your socks off, I thought they were pretty good cards, and, you know, if you are looking for an Nvidia card, I would recommend them. This one, not so much. So miss for me, and I do hope that we see improvements with the Super Series in not too long.
If you made it to the end of the video, be sure to drop a like. Every time you do so, AMD and Nvidia release new GPUs. Also, if you want to see more, check out one of these related videos. You won't be disappointed.